I'm delighted to have with me G. Prichard, who is tax counsel for the House Ways and Means Committee, and specifically the Committee on Select Revenue Measures Subcommittee. And I'm delighted, G, in some ways, that this will be your first tax prom. I'm embarrassed to say that, but it is kind of odd that it's in this format. So I'm delighted you can show up, and you didn't have to get your formal wear cleaned or out of the closet. So
That's a plus.
definitely,
Really dust it off. You know.
yeah. Although that the whole point of why it was named tax prom by staff, by the way, is because everybody got to dress up in their finest for at least one night,
Mhm.
and and be fancy. So we've tried to continue that tradition and keep with the moniker. But anyway, it is a shame, especially the fact that we started doing these events, or at least honoring public officials and notable people in 1941
Wow.
and continued it all the way through World War II and all the other crises and history making moments through American history since then. And it took COVID to sort of make us improvise through a virtual event. So we're delighted you could be here. Well, I think every story starts at the beginning. So tell us your path to Capitol Hill. First of all, what made you interested in tax in the first place? I get that question a lot.
Uh,
And so I'll pose it to you.
uh, this was not an expected career path for me at all. I I was an immigrant child, um, and against my parents' wishes, I majored in English. God forbid, and told them that I would like to one day become an English professor somewhere, some ivory tower. And the only thing my father told me was, because he was a product of the Korean War, grew up very poor, and the only idea that he had of any literary figures were drunken poets. And so he said, if you can promise me that you won't become a writer or a poet, it's okay. So the bar was low.
Very good.
Um, but it's too long of a story to tell how I got to where I am. But it was a very windy road. Um, but after law school, I took a fairly traditional path, worked at the law firm. Um, I gravitated towards tax, I think, because I think, unlike what people think about tax, um, it is a incredibly nuanced area. Um, and I think the language is particularly important. Um, and I liked drawing figures, squares and rectangles, ovals, triangles. And there was a certain conceptual nature to it, and I think that's probably why I got drawn to tax. Um, but uh, my path to the hill was, you know, uh, I stayed at the law firm a little longer than I expected. There was a really good chance and a timing for me to make the transition, and I didn't want to continue to do the same thing. And I was probably the biggest novice ever to have come to the hill. I didn't know a soul, but it was really, literally a mixture of timing and really good luck. Um, Ending up, you know, uh, working with Janice, and at the time, Karen McAfee and Aruna, Alan Lee, and really a good group of people.
Well, what did you have a moment in which you kind of had to pinch yourself and say, I'm working in Congress, and, and what did your parents think of that?
Um, I have to say, literally the first day, um, there was a member caucus in the tiny, tiny room where the Ways and Means minority um, caucus got to meet. That I think that room has since gone to one of the member offices, and I didn't know what was going on. I just sat there, and all the members filed in, and there walks John Lewis. And I thought, this is crazy. um, and he sat down somewhere, sort of like in front of me. The staff is all along the wall, and the tables in the front, in the middle, and there sits John Lewis. And that was really a pinch me moment. Um, but it got better because after the meeting, Sandy Levin at the time really loved to boast about his staff. Um, and I got a quick introduction, and there was John Lewis at the end of the meeting, end of the caucus. Members leave. They leave and they're busy, and they come and leave. After the meeting, they were leaving, and he turned to me and put his hand out to give me a handshake and said, "Welcome to the committee." And I just melted. And it was like, I'm never going to wash this hand again. But really, in his memory, he was just the kindest and nicest and the most generous member. Um, and so we miss him a lot.
Well, your father didn't want you to become an English professor, I guess, or at least a writer. But what what
As
did
if
they,
those things are easy, right? I mean, they're like, even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't.
well, what did they think of now you're working in the U.S. Congress?
Oh gosh, my dad, who's the product of the Korean War, as I said, and he lost his both of his parents fairly early on, and he had a very truncated educational, like he had very truncated education. He grew up in the rural side, and neither of my parents really finished high school. Um, and over the years, he's incredibly interested in politics. He doesn't know a ton about the US politics, although over time he's learned a lot, but he was really interested in Korean politics at the time. And, you know, I remember doing various projects in grade school and asking him, what was your dream? What did you want to be when you grow up, when you were a child? And he always said, I wanted to be a congressman.
Wow.
And so I don't know. I mean, we've never really had discussions about the ins and outs of lawmaking in Congress, but I know he thinks that public service is a really worthy way to spend your career. Um, so I think he's proud.
Uh,
I hope he's proud.
well, did you have any role models or mentors when you got to Capitol Hill? Somebody that took you under their wing and kind of showed you the ropes? Who had the biggest influence on
Oh
you?
gosh, I'm not gonna. There were too many, and I don't want to name all the names because then I'll leave somebody out, and then I'll get in trouble. Um, but I will say, as I said, I was a total novice. And I knew that on the outside what it was like to have clients and to serve the interests of the clients. Uh, and for some reason, that was a little bit harder to translate when I got to the committee. And one of the things that the existing staff and the longtime staff, along with Janice, really helped with, and it wasn't that they specifically told me that this was the way, but it was just by watching them through the years. It was how, you know, the members and the staff of the members were really, were our clients, and our role is to serve the interests of the clients. And it wasn't so much about, I know policy and I know what a reasonable rule should look like, because lawmaking, is itself a political process. And who knows more, better about that than the members themselves. And so I think that was a really important lesson for me, um, and something that I continue to work on. But there were obviously, the entire staff who was there and who'd been there for some time, um, who were much, they were really good at that. And so I continue to admire them, and, you know, make sure I remember, like, who my clients are.
Um, did you face any sort of hurdles, or I dare say glass ceilings, but along the way, speed bumps that you had to overcome? And how'd you do that?
Um, I don't particularly think that I did. And if I did, it wasn't readily clear, it wasn't made really clear to me. I think that I got to law school and came out of law school a little later in life than most people. I spent some time in graduate school and worked a little bit before I went to law school, and had, you know, two boys, got married and had two boys, and I didn't go probably the traditional route that, a lot of lawyers aspire to go through. Um, so in some ways it was self-imposed and not so much, I expected to get to certain places and I had a hard time getting there. And as far as, my time on the Hill, as most people know, the Ways and Means Democratic staff is an incredibly diverse place, where I think, you know, it is a combination of meritocracy and also, um, a place where opportunities really exist for people of color and, women and female people of color. And so I've always felt incredibly welcome there, and just, like, there's really no more ideal place. So yeah, not so much, but I'm just telling my own story.
Were you ever given an I don't know, a task or a responsibility or an opportunity by your boss, and you kind of had to say, "My goodness, I can't believe I've been given such a responsibility," and that seemed out of maybe too much, or just out of it surprised you?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. You know, I think legislatively, because I mean, committee staff, like, your job is mostly legislative. Um, and we don't deal as much with, district matters and, um, campaigns or political matters as much as the district staff is exposed to, or the personal officers are exposed to. Um, but the time that I is rather memorable to me, is probably around 2014 sometime. Um, Not long after I got there, there was a lot of consternation over corporate inversions. And I'm sure you remember that time. Uh, and we were a very small staff. And ranking member Levin, Sandy Levin, along with his brother Carl Levin, um, w- were very worried about the trend. And so he really got the staff to try to do whatever was necessary. But, we were in the minority in the House. Um, and so we knew that these were not pieces of legislation that would make law. Um, but we also knew that we had the Obama administration who was also very concerned about these things. And so those times, like I do feel like, as staff and as somebody whose primary portfolio was in that area, I felt enormous amount of responsibility. Um, and, as you know, that effort kind of resulted in a series of very important reg projects um, over the years. And that's a really memorable time for me.
I was going to ask if there are any pieces of legislation or policies that were most gratifying. That sounds like it. Were there others that um, are kind of your favorites?
Mm, uh, People are gonna kill me when I say this. Um, Not stuff that we drafted, but TCJA was something. you know, that took off. I've not been on the Hill that long. I think about 7 years now. That took up about 3.5 years of my life. And, because we were in the minority, we weren't constantly turning out pieces of legislation. And so, but starting with uh, the destination based tax reform that the Speaker Ryan at the time put out, fairly quickly followed by the draft of TCJA and everything that ensued, uh, is quite memorable. And it wasn't so much, obviously we didn't have part in drafting that, but all of the reaction to it and responses to it, I think, certainly memorable, um, and certainly worth, you know, focusing our attention on. Yeah.
Were there have there been any? Well, for every interesting piece of legislation, there's a stinker in there somewhere where you kind of have to close close your eyes and wish you hadn't been a part of it. Anything you sort of cringe at and think, oh dear,
Oh,
I hope my name is not assigned to that one.
oh God. Unfortunately, we didn't have to deal with stuff like that as much. Uh, and Fortunately, I did not have to be part of renaming a, post office, um, which happens quite often. That happens often. I found out. There was one piece of legislation. I will not name the member. It was an off committee member who very early on, as a freshman member, we helped him uh, write a piece of legislation that would have the effect of delaying or extending the time within which you could make a charitable contribution and still, have it be recognized. Um, that was not my favorite project. uh, but clearly understood why that was important for him. But it was not my shining moment.
Well, in your 7 years there, have there been any moments in which you think Wow, I just witnessed history. This is going to be part of my autobiography.
This has nothing to do with tax. Um, and there were many, many things that happened just outside our door because, the Supreme Court is right there. And the Capitol is a building we can see from our windows. But the one thing that's very memorable for me was when I can't remember, and this is a shame that I can't now remember which massive shooting uh, caused this event to occur. But um, when Democratic members of Congress decided to do a sit-in um, in the Capitol until some form of gun control legislation was put on the floor for vote. And that was an ask and that was a demand. And so, along with Mr. Lewis, many, many, many members spent hours and hours doing a sit-in on the floor of uh, on the House floor. And I just remember monitoring the events on one of the House channels and seeing, all the business that was scheduled that day is not going to happen because I think the members intended to stay really long. And seeing them sitting on the floor and kneeling on the floor, that was really quite something.
Well, when you think of all the hearings and floor debate that you've watched, have you seen anything you say, I can't believe I just saw that? That was either the silliest or strangest thing that I've ever seen on the floor during a hearing.
Um, I have a feeling maybe somebody else might have said this. But if I'm the first, or if I'm the only one saying this, then this might jog some other people's memory. Um, this was, I think it was a healthcare markup. It was not even a tax group. It was not specifically a tax markup. I can't remember the year, but this is definitely before TCJA. Um, it was a major healthcare markup, and it might have been, the Republican proposal or something like that. And I don't know why. Essentially, the entire Democratic staff stayed all night uh, through the end of the hearing. And it was fairly late in the evening when, people were getting very tired. There was a colloquy between Sandra Levin and Jason Smith of Missouri. Um, he actually got, yeah, and I think it had to do, the original issue was it had to do with tanning, tax imposed on tanning beds. That's what it was. And um, Jason Smith of Missouri proceeded to argue why that's a terrible tax because it's taxed mostly on women, and that, really that is not really the primary source of skin cancer or cause of skin cancer, but that it's really the sun. And why don't Democrats tax the sun? And Sandra Levin says, I'll tell you why, because it's a little bit hard to tax the sun. And they start to have this exchange, and I'm sitting there thinking, this cannot be real. I mean, people blurt, like they laughed. There was people were breaking out into laughter. I mean, that was like a little bit of a caffeine jolt, but I will not forget that just because of how funny it was.
Well, you don't have to name names, but what's the dumbest question that a member of Congress has ever asked you?
Um, there hasn't been one. I can't think of one. I'm sure there was one where I like rolled my eyes, but I can't think of one right now at the moment.
Well, that may be a good thing, actually.
As I say, there's no question that's a bad question. There's no bad question.
That's true. And your job is to answer them and to educate them. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's all right. Well, what's the most important thing that you've learned working on the Hill, and what would you advise a novice like yourself 7 years ago when they arrived at the Hill?
I will go back to what I said earlier about what I thought was one of the most important lessons that I learned from watching my incredibly professional colleagues, um, which is that, you know, we are not the members, they are, and we're not elected officials, but they are, and that they have thousands of people that they represent, whose voices they need to represent. And those are our clients. And our job is not so much to insist on our views of what's right and wrong, but to honor um, what the members think is the right way to think about something. And I think that having, professional background in tax helps because that helps us inform them of the history and why certain things may be more preferable than others. But at the end of the day, it's the members who make the decisions, and we are at their service. And so I think, when we get frustrated about something or a particular policy, I think that that's a good place to return to. That um, they are the decision makers, and they are also in the position to answer to their constituents, and that's a democracy, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that's very thoughtful. Well, from the sublime to the ridiculous, now we wrap it up with our poll questions. These are fun questions that we're asking everybody, and then we'll play the answers during the program. We will then obviously we'll be sending these poll questions out to all the attendees to see what the prevailing answers will be. And so this
Okay.
will be like one of those game shows, survey
Uh-huh.
quiz kind of thing. Okay, so the first question, and you may have just answered it. The first question is, being a congressional staffer is most like the following and why? A, it's most like being a comfort dog in training. B, being an extra in the TV show Veep. C, a rodeo clown. Or D, the entertainment director at Chuck E. Cheese.
Um, uh, Most like A in my experience, because members know a lot of things, but sometimes they just need, that memo or like you to be there in case something comes up. I think just having a piece of the staff there is comforting to them. So I say more, most like A. There's a little bit of the last one, what of the entertainment director at Chuck E. Cheese. There's always a little bit of that. Um, some of that always comes up during hearings and markups. So yeah, I'd say that.
Very good. Well, poll question number two, in your opinion, which is the most accurate political TV show? A, House of Cards, B, West Wing, C, Veep, or D, 24? House of Cards, West Wing, Veep, or 24?
Um, the only the only show that I watched seriously And I'm kind of embarrassed to say, given, how old I am, that I wasn't as into West Wing. My husband's a big fan of West Wing. Um, but that I actually watched House of Cards, the original version, the British version, which is quite good. Um, and I have to say, very, very lately, it's there's a lot. It's like there's a lot of resemblance going on there. So oh, maybe more than I would prefer, but House of Cards.
House of Cards, the original.
Also, it's congressional,
That's,
parliamentarian, congressional.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our questions. That wasn't too hard, was it?
Not at all. And it was lovely to see you.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to try to have the most fun that we can, given the circumstances, and try to showcase, folks like yourself who are really the glue that hold Congress together. You staff are the ones that work the hardest, sweat the details, and unfortunately don't get as much credit as you deserve. So we wanted to dedicate this program to folks like yourself.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it'll be a fun evening. We'll be sending out links and invitations here very soon. So put 5 p.m. on November 19th on your calendar.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Good
This
to
has
see
been fun.
you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye now.